Hi everyone, my name is Yusuf Oluwafemi Salako, popularly known as Obi David, a 500 level law student of the University of Lagos and founder of the Obi David Consults. And if you are new to my channel, you may consider subscribing by clicking on the subscribe button down below and hitting that notification bell. Please do subscribe. And today we shall begin a series of lectures on the principle of consideration in the law of contract. Today will be the first lecture, therefore consideration lecture 1. And we have a general overview of what we shall be interrogating today. However, before I run you through the content of our general overview, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to those of you that have subscribed to my channel. We have 527 subscribers, and I just want to say a deep thank you to every single soul that subscribed to my channel from the number 1 to 527. I say a deep thank you, great gratitude to you. And for those of us that have not subscribed, beg you, please do subscribe and hit that notification bell so that whenever I put up new videos on different spheres of law, you can get notified. Then, why don't we just go into the business of the day. Now, this is what we shall be interrogating today. First, we start by looking at giving an introduction first, and also we proceed to the preliminary points, then move to the history, and then conceptual clarification, where we'll be answering the questions: what is consideration? How do we measure it? We interrogate some case laws, and as well, I have a brief summary. But need I say that the behavioral objectives for this particular course is that by the end of today's lecture, you, my viewers, should at least be able to know what consideration is, in what form consideration could take, the principle of adequacy and sufficiency of consideration. Now,
in my journey through the world, over land and over sea, I see different cultures and different people's ways. I was born where the sun never sets and never rises. I was born where the heat is like a second skin.
The general rule of the law of contracts is that for there to be a valid agreement, there must be certain requirements that must have been met. First is that there must be an offer, a valid acceptance, an intention to create legal relationship, that the terms are clear, and there must be consideration. The question is, what do we mean when we say that there must be consideration? The rule or the principle of consideration simply suggests that it is only a party that has furnished consideration that can come before the court to enforce that particular agreement. It then means that if you haven't furnished consideration, then you cannot go before the court and ask the court to enforce that agreement. Now, what is the purpose of consideration? The ordinary purpose of consideration is that the law cannot force a man to make good his gratuitous promises. Promises that he made when you haven't contributed anything to that agreement. That is the reason why the court will always ask you, what consideration have you furnished? Now, there's some preliminary points that you need to understand, that you need to know. The first is that consideration is not necessary in contracts made by deed. This is an exception to the general rule that the law will not enforce any agreement that is bereft of consideration. If the agreement is made by deed, then you don't need to furnish consideration. That is, for formal contract, you don't need consideration. An agreement that we made by deed could be a lease. So supposing you are a tenant and you are owing an arrears of rent, but then your landlord has not terminated or determined the tenancy, you can still go before the court to even enforce that agreement, despite the fact that you have not paid your rent, despite the fact that you have not furnished consideration. The reason is because that particular contract is made by deed and consideration is not necessary. The second preliminary point that you need to be apprised of is that consideration may be executory or executed, but not passed. I repeat, consideration may be executory or executed, but not passed. Now, what do we mean by these two terms, executory consideration and executed consideration? Now, for executory consideration, it means that the only thing that are passed between the parties are mere promises. None of the parties has acted, just promises. I made a promise and you made a promise. Let's take an illustration, for example. Supposing you walk up to me on campus and then you say, hey, Uri David, I want to get your past question. And I'm like, oh, my past question, oh, for what level? Say, oh, year 2. And I say, oh, that's 2,000 naira. And you were like, okay, bring one for me tomorrow. When you bring it for me tomorrow, I will transfer money into your account. Now there is an agreement between us. An agreement that I will sell past question to you and then you will pay me. But as at that moment, I haven't given you the past question. That is the obligation that I've decided or that I've promised to fulfill. But I haven't done that. And you haven't also done that. What we have only done was to simply make promises to each other. And that is what is known as executory consideration. Now, for executed consideration, it means that at least one of the parties has actually acted on the promise. Which means that, take for example, you want to buy this earphone. As you know that I sell earphones. And then you walk up to me and say, oh, David, do you have any earphone with you? And I say, yes. I open up my bag and I bring out this earphone. And I say, oh, you love it. And I give it to you. But unfortunately, you are probably not with cash at that moment. And then we both agreed that, okay, you know what, when I get to my hostel, I will transfer money into your account. Now, in this particular circumstance, I have furnished consideration. Why? Because I have parted with something. I promised to sell the earphone to you, and I have done that because I've handed it over to you. But for you, you haven't fulfilled your own part of the bargain because you are still supposed to send me money, but you haven't for them, for that particular moment. And then means that what we have is an executed contract. So, and that's what we say that consideration can either be executory or be executed, but it cannot be passed. Then another preliminary point you need to understand is that for consideration there are two parties, which are the promisor and the promisee. The promisor is the one making the promise directed into the promisee. So, for example, where I promise to sell this earphone to you, I am the promisor because I made a promise of giving you this earphone. Then you are the promisee. Take it on the flip side. You also promised to transfer money to me. With respect to the issue or the question of payment, you are then the promisor and I am the promisee because you are the one making a promise to me and I am the one receiving the promise. Anytime I think about the question or the principle of promisee and promisor, it takes me to the concept of subject and object in English language. The object is the doer of the action while the subject is the doer of the action while the object is the receiver of the action. It is more the promisor is the subject doing something, making the promise, then the promisee is the object receiving that promise. I'm sure you understand what all these concepts then mean. And so we then delve into the history of consideration. History of consideration goes to the history of the law of contracts. And I must state at the very outset that from the beginning, the court was very unwilling to attend to contractual matters. Because in those days, the court believed that these are private matters. Yes, two individuals decided to enter into an agreement, and it is for them to deal with it, not the business of the court. And this goes to the root of the principle of freedom of contract. So the court used to say Now they have the freedom to contract, so they should deal with it. And therefore, it was very difficult to bring, matters based on contract. However, the court was attending to tortious matters, that is to tort, especially on trespass and deceit. And the thing that these parties now began to do was that they would appear before the court and wouldn't bring it under contract, but rather they would say that, okay, since this person made a promise to me, and yet this person has not fulfilled this promise to me, then there was deception. Then means that in the early days of contract, contractual matters were brought under tort, especially under deceit. Then the court started to attend to these matters, and subsequently the court devised a doctrine known as assumpsit. Assumpsit simply means that he has undertaken, he has promised, and that was why the court began to now look into contractual matters, especially on matters that have to do with consideration, to say that you undertook, you promised. But then the same principle that there is still freedom of contract is still one that the court was still apprised of. And then so the court will normally ask the party that brought the matter before the court and said, yes, he has undertaken, but then you, what have you contributed to this agreement? And that was how the principle of consideration, specifically on the law of contract, generally was developed. And this helps us to understand why even till today, the courts will not enforce any agreement that is devoid of consideration. Now we shall then proceed to conceptual clarification.